And really what industry has done over the years is we've turned international trade more into like fast food. Because as a consumer, you just want to get on the internet, you want to order this shirt by way of example, and you want it cheap and you want it tomorrow, you want it fast. And the supply chains have enabled that.
Well, welcome to the show. We're here at Flexport Freight Expectations. I've here today with me Bernie Hart. He's our own Vice President of Customs. We are live at Transport Logistics in Munich. And it seems that the talk of the town is all about tariffs, about trade, and about mitigation of tariffs. Where, normally the talk of the town at TLM is about freight and freight rates and contracts, etc. Obviously, it's partly driven, we have a little bit of a bias because it's partly driven by our launch of the tariff simulator, which is, a first of its kind. And Bernie is talking to customers every day about solutioning and seeing how we can help them. Bernie, what do you hear from customers?
Yeah, it's very interesting. The folks that are coming up to the booth and want to talk to us are exactly on the topic that you're on, which is tariffs. Everybody wants to understand about tariffs, kind of what are they, what can they expect, and where's this going? I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to tell everybody exactly where it's going. But the reason we launched this simulator and this calculator is because everything is changing so quickly. It used to be that...
So quickly even.
Yeah,
that the
exactly.
last announcement on steel was only 5 hours implementation timeline.
Yeah. And what usually happens in this industry is a lot of us are dependent on either content providers or we go out and get our own content. And what that basically means is every time there's a change to the Federal Register that could impact duties, taxes, and fees, we get a timeline associated with that. And we are talking months before this stuff usually rolls out. What is happening now is it's happening, as you just said, in 5 hours. You get that kind of advance notice. So even a company like Flexport and then the clients that we're working with today expect us to have real-time data and information. So as a customs broker, we have a responsibility by law to have the most timely and accurate information at time of entry. That is proven very, very difficult just because a lot of these rules and regulations, they aren't really published yet. And we're giving it, I don't want to say our best shot, but sometimes it's our best guess. You submit this to customs and it comes back and it's like, well, why did that error out? And why is it doing it this way? That's not my understanding as to how this works.
Yep.
So what we ended up doing is this simulator that we just launched is Flexport is actually maintaining all of the content associated with this. So
we are actually creating the data.
Exactly. Yeah. And then updating it in a real-time environment. And as opposed to keeping it behind a closed curtain, we're just opening it up to everybody and allowing them to have access to it.
Yeah, I think the coolest thing about it is the most common question is like, where do you get the data from?
Yeah.
Well, we're actually creating the data,
Exactly.
right? And with this last one, with a 5 hour time window that happened in the middle of the night, we'll probably need a few more hours to get it updated. But it will be updated today, which is super cool. So that it's nearly real time on that one. So what should importers be thinking about right now? Obviously, a lot is changing. What should be top of mind for them?
Yep. So international trade in general obviously has been around for decades, hundreds of years. But from a trade perspective, every time you're crossing a border, everybody is concerned with what is my net landed cost associated with this. And that's really when you're buying it from a foreign supplier, let's say China, what does it really cost, the unit price, but what does it cost to get it to its final destination? Mm-hmm. And that is your net landed cost. And what everybody is really focused on right now is what is that? Because it's a changing landscape now, especially with what's going on in the U.S.
Yep.
Liberation Day, reciprocal tariffs, IEPA, stacking tariffs, all of those, which is kind of fun because this has turned into a household discussion. Nobody ever knew what I did from an industry perspective, but now everybody's
You're all of a sudden cool.
Exactly. I wouldn't say cool, but everybody wants to know, what is this tariff thing and what's going on, and really what industry has done over the years is we've turned international trade more into like fast food. Because as a consumer, you just want to get on the internet, you want to order this shirt by way of example, and you want it cheap and you want it tomorrow. You want it fast. And the supply chains have enabled that. But what is basically catching up with this is these duties, taxes, and fees. There's de minimis, which we'll get into in a minute here. But you have countries like the United States that are basically putting a stronger emphasis on international trade because the U.S. is the largest market in the world. We have the biggest amount of consumers in the United States. And what the government is trying to do is assess additional duties, taxes, and fees to level the playing field is kind of the rhetoric that's out there today. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's just the approach that they're taking. So from an import perspective, you really have three levers that you can play with. The first one is the harmonized tariff schedule, or the HTS. Every product crossing a border has to have an HTS number. It sounds easy, but there's 17,000 choices. And then there's this lovely chapter at the end, chapter 99, other, where everything gets grouped into.
An infinite amount.
Exactly. But if you get the HTS wrong, the ripple effect is huge. But that HTS number determines your duty rate. It also determines admissibility out of a country and then into a next country. So businesses need to be hyper vigilant and focused on this.
Do you also imply with that a lot of HTS codes need to be reviewed because they haven't taken it that seriously because it was zero anyhow or very low? And therefore, there's a lot of opportunity for customers to have like a redefinition of their HTS code to see whether they're in compliance. Because now all of a sudden, it's hard to be out of compliance if everything is close to zero. But if there's now massive swings in duty rates, you're out of compliance and there's potential big fines.
Absolutely. So you didn't have to care so much about the HTS if it was under $800. Even if it was over $800 and you're paying traditional duty rates in the 4 to 5% for the United States, you really didn't care. Now it's up in the 50% and all that. So you should be doing periodic reviews of your HTS just to make sure that it is the right and proper HTS. Now, you never, ever classify for lower duty rates. That's kind of a no-no.
That's a no-no, I agree.
You classify from a compliance perspective with what makes the most sense. But also attached to that HTS number are exclusions. And then within those exclusions, you have additional HTS numbers by way of example for steel and aluminum. So what does that require from a business now? Now, if you were the manufacturer, Sanne, and I was importing from you, I was bringing a couch in, just by way of example, I would come to you and ask you for a costed bill of material. And you'd be like, well, why do you need that? And I was like, well, you probably have metal springs, and those metal springs are going to attack a different duty rate. If you can't break that out for me, I have to attribute it to the entire entered value of the couch. But if you can break it out, I can help you get a lower duty rate. So this is what we're encouraging businesses to do, is to look at costed bill of materials, share more data and information.
So the complexity of the data feed is going to balloon as a result of that.
Yes.
Okay, so you said HTS code is number one. I think, the major, lever that you're talking about is like, you gotta look at your classifications, make sure they're all in order, not only for, duty mitigation, but also just being, number one, being in compliance. Okay, you said there were three things we have to look at. What's number two?
Number two is country of origin.
Obviously.
Country of origin is a fun one. And a lot of businesses just assumed or are assuming with this is, okay, I'll just stay with China. So if I have my product in China and I ship it to Singapore and then bring it into the US, country of origin is Singapore because it came in from Singapore. I was like, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. No,
country of origin.
Trade.
Exactly. And so what you really want and what we're encouraging businesses to do and to look at are a couple of key programs on this. Number one is substantial transformation. So what that basically is if you're bringing in a bunch of raw materials or products, and some of them come from China, some of them come from Taiwan. It really doesn't matter. You bring those into Singapore. You then combine them into something else. If it comes out of Singapore, one of the tests is it a unique HTS number? And if it changed significantly in value, that's substantial transformation. Now, country of origin just shifted from China to Singapore in that overall example. So businesses need to be looking at that. The other thing they should be looking at is first sale. So from a first sale perspective,
You need to explain that a little bit because that's not an easy program.
No. First sale is tough.
So let's go into, let's say, first sale for dummies. Not Professor Bernie explains first sale.
So from a first sale perspective, there are some rules that you have to follow, and you should get pre-qualified for it. And what it is when you submit to customs, you're basically telling customs that this product was always destined to the United States. That's kind of rule one. And that along its way, it stopped at different points. It could be multiple points for additional value add associated with it. So let's take the shirt I have on. Let's take the shirt was actually manufactured in China, but it went to Singapore. And in Singapore, I added some embroidery on it. I added some buttons, some things along those lines. And then it got shipped to the United States. So there's the first sale invoice that actually went from China to Singapore, had a value on it. That's the value you can now use for the importation into the United States. It's called the first sale value. So the lower your entered value, the less your duties are because you're applying the duty rate against the entered value. So that's a process. Now,
but I assume there's a lot of scrutiny on this program that you have to look very carefully whether you're doing the right things here. So
correct.
You have to use a trade advisory service, I guess, to...
Exactly. And we actually have a trade advisory service, reports up through me. Of course, you know that. But the woman that runs that, not only a licensed customs broker, but she's also a trade attorney. And we advise on this all the time as to whether or not this makes sense. And can you really defend your overall position? Does this apply for first sale? So we encourage businesses to really take a good hard look at that. In the past, Sanne, there was a lot of some reluctance in the overall industry because the supplier in our scenario in China didn't want to share that invoice.
Obviously.
Because they don't want to disclose their profit margin or any of that stuff. But because of where we are from an international trade perspective, more and more
there's
businesses
more collaboration
are willing to do this.
So number three.
So number three, the big one here is value.
Value.
The value of the goods, because that's a big one. And I'm hearing a lot from businesses that you have an Incoterm and you have several choices from an Incoterm perspective. But a lot of folks are thinking they can move to a DDP, delivered duty paid, or a modified delivered duty paid. And what that essentially does is the manufacturer takes responsibility on the purchase order. So on the purchase order, you have Incoterms. The Incoterms is a contract, and it determines liability between the buyer and the seller, which is fine. It's gone on for decades. But in this case, from a DDB perspective, you're shifting liability and responsibility to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer is saying, don't worry, I'll bring this to you, Sanne. I'll bring in this shirt and I'll deliver it to your back dock. I'll take responsibility for paying the duties, taxes, and fees. Which is okay. They can do that. It's allowable by law. But what are they doing on the commercial invoice? Is if this was $30 and all of a sudden they're bringing it in for $10, why? What has changed? If you're seeing dramatic drops in your duties, taxes, and fees, customs is going to see that. They're going to come back and question it. And you could sit here and say, well, they're taking responsibility for it. My Incoterm says this. But you're still a principal party to the transaction. So it's still, it can reflect on
ultimately, you're going to end in jail for this.
So you just have to be careful. And there's a lot of clients that are out there today saying, just tell me what you want on the commercial invoice. I'll put that value.
Well, that's also because some clients are with their backs against the wall because the businesses don't work with very high duties. So they get creative, but they need to realize that there are consequences down the road.
Correct.
And given the investments that customs is also doing on the AI side, they will figure out these patterns at some point. So let's go to mitigation. We already talked about classification. What else do we need to do on mitigation?
So I think a good first step on this is what we just launched is that calculator, that simulator, that tariff simulator.
Just look what it does to your supply chain, and if you can change country of origin, apply for some exceptions.
Exactly. Because what you want to be able to do is, number one, have multiple sources of supply if you possibly can, because it varies by country in terms of your duty rate. But in addition to that, you want to understand, like if I have this pair of glasses here, if these glasses I can source in multiple countries, and I'm going to pick a country based on duty minimization, duty avoidance, and the actual cost of producing that. So I do a predictive landed cost. That's what our trade simulator does for coming into the United States. And if I assumed I was going to be able to take advantage of duty minimization, duty avoidance. So let's say in this scenario, those glasses were going to come from Australia. There's a free trade agreement with Australia. I want to be able to take advantage of that as long as they can prove enough of the content was Australian made. That's wonderful. But if I made my purchasing decision off of that, and then when my supply chain executes, I'm not able to take advantage of it because I don't have a certificate of origin, I don't have a manufacturer's affidavit to substantiate it, and I can't take advantage of that, I just lost out as the importer. You want to be able to go back to that manufacturer and hold them accountable for it or liable for it. So what we're doing with this simulator is it's really a predictive landed cost. On our platform, we actually calculate the actual landed cost. And then what we're going to allow businesses to do is work that variance. So give the procurement organizations, the finance organizations the opportunity to go out and try and lower their duties, taxes.
And that's not easy because the context can change again as well.
And it does.
Does the free trade agreement with Australia still exist in a month? We don't know, right?
Exactly.
Probably it is, but What else about levers?
So from the levers that are out there today, we encourage everybody to look at sources of supply, the three areas that we just talked about. In addition to that, we're just asking everybody you just kind of have to stay up to date with what's going on from an industry perspective. Because, as we talked about at the beginning of this, within 5 hours, the steel changed.
And last but not least, if you have exports, you might be eligible for drawback.
For drawback,
which is, of course, another great way to reduce your overall landed cost.
For duty minimization, duty avoidance, for sure.
Hey, so I'm going to ask for your crystal ball. I know you don't have it, but if there's somebody who gets closest to a crystal ball, it's you. What do you think the next 6 months, the tariff landscape? What's and I know this is your personal opinion. This is not what's going to happen.
Right.
But
Exactly.
What, based on your decades in this industry and our ties to what we hear from Washington, et cetera, what do you think is going to play out?
I think there's going to be peaks and valleys. There's going to be slices of hell for the overall industry as we go, because we've already set 90-day timelines on U.S., Canada.
The world these days is in 90 days timeline.
Exactly. And then we're all looking at these dates. What is going to drop on that date? What else is going to change from a business perspective? So everyone needs to stay vigilant on that. So get your information from either webinars, from podcasts, from your brokers, your
tariff simulator.
Exactly. Just try and stay updated as much as possible on that. And where we see this going over time is it has to settle at some point in time. Do I believe that's going to happen in 6 months? Absolutely not. You cannot go out and strike agreements with 54 different countries in that amount of time.
No.
And each one of these, every time we think one is settled, it usually resurfaces again. And we all have these speculations. For example, the China talks that went on. There was some stuff leaked in advance where even Trump had said, it's going to be 80%, and it ended up being even better when he came out of that. But even since that time, there's some stress that happens kind of back and forth on this. And I think what's happening is, just like us in business, the government is getting more and more data. And as they get their data, they're making changes on their side. The problem is that the expedited nature with how they're rolling this stuff out, changing a supply chain is not a trivial task. And even updating the duties, taxes, and fees. So, you have importers that are getting very frustrated because now they're getting hit with storage and demurrage charges because their stuff sits there because we need additional data and information. I can charge you the highest rate possible and get that stuff.
But it's more expensive than paying for the merge.
Exactly. You're just going to be more mad if I do that.
Exactly.
So it's trying to work through this process, but you really should be viewing, especially your broker, as your trusted partner. and working.
Well, the old wisdom of you date your forwarder, you marry your broker is more true than ever.
Yeah, it's playing out now, right in front of us as we go through this. Yeah. So I just encourage people to stay calm and try and stay on top of it the best you can, and leverage the expertise that's out there today. So you're not in it alone.
Our mission is, of course, to make global trade easy.
Yes.
This is a little bit, fighting our mission, but we can actually, with the tools that we're now launching, we're trying to accelerate. Yeah. Making it easier and staying on top of this. Well, thank you so much, Bernie.
Thank you.
Have fun here at TLM.
Yeah, no, it is a lot of fun. Thank you.